The Holocaust was a very real and very scary event, so I'm going to read some actual quotes about it from survivors for you for Halloween. Remember, these are real stories from actual Holocaust survivors. I would warn children that they should not listen to these stories as they could get nightmares or have other emotional scars due to them, but they have probably heard many of these Holocaust stories in their public schools already. This first story was found in a Swedish newspaper. After some time, Abraham was transferred to Bergen-Belsen in northern Germany. He ended up in a pile of corpses, where he lay for several days. German soldiers were shooting randomly into the pile of dead bodies. One shot almost hit him in the knee. Abraham could not move, and was covered in blood and excrement. The only thing he could do is to moisten his lips with the blood from other dead Jews. Story number 2 is from Irene Weisberg's Isblood's 2008 autobiography, The Fifth Diamond. In the next room lay scores of sick, emaciated Jews. Connected to each skeletal body were 3 bottles. Those barely alive people were being drained of their blood. The Nazi doctors had inserted one tube into each person's neck, one into the crook of the arm, and the other at the back of the knee. 3 pints of blood were simultaneously drawn from each prisoner. The next day, when the woman woke, she was lucid, and explained to me that her 18-year-old daughter had died in Auschwitz-Birkenau. She told me that her daughter and another group of young girls had been taken to Block 7. They had literally been drained of their own blood for plasma for the German army and allies. Our third story comes from Stephen Ross, who was speaking at an event commemorating Kristallnacht, and said about the Holocaust, quote, "Little kids must know, and if they don't know they won't tell their children and their children's children," end quote. His address was often graphic, as he described the manner in which he escaped mass killings and death by starvation. To survive, we were resorting to cannibalism, Ross said. We were eating each other to survive. He showed the audience some objects from the camps: the cap he had to wear as part of his uniform, the dish he used to eat, bathe and defecate, prisoners' flimsy shoes, scissors men used to tidy themselves up before selection, and animal figurines made from the crushed bones of Jews. He said his mission is to keep the images of the Holocaust alive, and give people an inkling of what it means to be a survivor today. Our next story comes from Eva Alson, a Holocaust survivor now living in Canada, who was the featured speaker at an event held by the Jewish Students Association on Tuesday, October 12th. At Auschwitz, the guards did a roll call every morning, no matter what the weather was like. One morning they were fed surprise soup, which included human hair and bones. Our fifth story is from This Must Not Happen Again, the Black Book of Fascist Horror. At Buchenwald, in the little camp, where prisoners slept 16 to a shelf, an infraction of discipline, particularly an attempt to escape, not infrequently resulted in all 16 being condemned. Such persons were immediately marched to a small door in the fence of the backyard at a point immediately adjacent to the incinerator building. This door opened inward until it hit a doorstop which held it in a position parallel to the building's wall, thus creating a corridor 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep. At the far end was an opening about 4 feet by 4 feet, flush with the ground, the head of a concrete shaft, about 13 feet deep, the bottom floor of which was a continuation of the concrete floor of the room at the front end of the basement. The condemned prisoners, on being hurried and pushed through the door in the fence, inevitably fell into this shaft, and crashed 13 feet down to the cement cellar floor. This room, on the floor at one end of which they now found themselves, was the strangling room. As they hit the floor they were garroted, with a short double-end noose, by SS guards, and hung on hooks along the side walls, about 6½ feet above the floor. When a consignment had been hung up, any who were still struggling were stunned by a wooden mallet, which was exhibited to us in the chamber still bearing stains of blood. The bodies were left on the hooks until called for by the incinerator crew. The next story is from the book Auschwitz, Technique of Operation of the Gas Chambers. We began our work. Our team of 7 included only real professionals. One had been given special hooks to hoist himself to the top of the posts. He disconnected the electricity and brought down the wires in the reflector. Then we got ourselves into position to pull out the posts. And then wallow in the red, and the red was blood. The first contact with it gave us the shivers, and we lost the power to speak. And yet we already knew about it. But between knowing and experiencing there is just no comparison. Underneath us there were men like us, and, for sure the team of our 7 predecessors, was also beneath our feet. Then we went into action, wallowing in human blood, to recover the lampposts. I could not understand why the corpses bled. The pressure when they heaped earth on them? Or the effect of the gas? My 6 companions had received almost new shoes, but not me, because my mountain shoes were still in good condition. This next story is from Leigh White in her book, The Long Balkan Night. That night the Greenshirts loaded 200 Jewish prisoners into trucks and drove them to the municipal slaughterhouse there. In a fiendish parody of kosher methods of butchering, they hung many of the Jews on meat hooks and slit their throats, others they forced to kneel at chopping blocks, while they beheaded them with cleavers. For our final story, we leave you with something from Mengele, The Complete Story, by Gerald L. Posner and John Ware. Scores of Mengele's guinea pigs died at this stage, many of them from a particularly bizarre experiment in which the blood supplies of different pairs of twins were interchanged. The results of one of these experiments were graphically described by a witness, Vera Alexander. One day Mengele brought chocolate and special clothes. The next day, SS men came and took 2 children away. They were 2 of my pets, Tito and Nino. One of them was a hunchback. 2 or 3 days later, an SS man brought them back in a terrible state. They had been cut. The hunchback was sewn to the other child, back to back, their wrists back to back too. There was a terrible smell of gangrene. The cuts were dirty and the children cried every night. That wraps up our tales from the Holocaust.